She had a plan. A foolproof, humiliating, absolutely genius plan. She was going to show up to that blind date looking like a disaster. Mismatched clothes, chaotic hair, the most aggressively wrong outfit she owned. And the man on the other side of that restaurant table would take one look at her and run. Simple. Clean. Done. What she didn't plan for was a man who didn't run. A man who looked at her like she was the most interesting thing he'd seen in years. A man who, she would find out far too late, was one of the wealthiest people in Los Angeles. And the worst part? By the time she found out who he really was, she had already started falling. This is the story of Ava Prescott, a woman who dressed like a catastrophe to escape a blind date, and ended up walking straight into the one thing she wasn't prepared for, someone who saw through every single layer of the act. If you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button, because every week we bring you stories that will make you laugh out loud, hold your breath, and feel things in your chest you forgot were there. And if this story already has you curious, drop a comment below. Tell us, would you have run from that date or stayed? Los Angeles had a way of making you feel both important and invisible at the same time. Ava Prescott had lived in the city for 4 years, long enough to stop being dazzled by the light and start noticing all the shadows it cast. She worked events, corporate galas, product launches, the occasional celebrity birthday party, where she moved quietly through rooms of people who didn't see her unless they needed something. She was good at her job. She was good at being useful and then disappearing. It was a skill she'd spent years perfecting, though she would never have described it that way to herself. She was 27 years old, and on the morning that would change everything, she was sitting at her kitchen table eating cereal that had gone slightly stale, reading a collection agency notice, and trying to calculate exactly how many more months she could keep her life from completely unraveling. The number she kept arriving at was 3. Her father had died 2 years ago. He had been charming and warm and impossibly generous, the kind of man who picked up every check, who said yes to everyone, who never seemed to worry about money because surely it would work itself out. It hadn't worked itself out. What he'd left behind instead was a stack of debt that Ava only discovered when the phone calls started coming after the funeral, soft-voiced people asking for her father, and then, when she explained, asking for her. She'd been managing it for 2 years, quietly, stubbornly, by herself. The way she managed everything. She was rereading the collection notice for the 3rd time when her phone rang. Jade Washington, best friend, event photographer, person most likely to ignite a situation Ava would have to put out, had a voice that arrived loud even through a speaker. "Before you say anything," Jade said, "I need you to know that I did this out of love." Ava set down the notice. That sentence has never once preceded good news. "I signed you up for a blind date." A pause so long that Jade apparently interpreted it as interest. "His name is June. He's Jade. Apparently very charming, smart. Min, who works for him, says he's Jade. Not a serial killer, which is a low bar, but it's a bar. Jade." Silence. "I lost a bet," Jade said, finally, in the small voice of a woman who had accepted her fate. "Marcus and I bet on the Lakers making the playoffs, and I was possibly slightly overconfident. And the consequence of losing was that I had to set you up on a date by Friday, and today is Wednesday, so..." Ava pressed her forehead against the cool window glass. In the street below, a man walking a very large dog was having an argument with the dog about a patch of sidewalk. The dog was winning. "Fine," she said. Jade made a noise like a woman who had just been handed back her firstborn. "But I'm not going to perform," Ava continued. "I'm not going to dress up, or be charming, or pretend to be someone who wants to be there. I'm going to go, fulfill the terms of your ridiculous bet, and if this man takes one look at me and leaves, that is not my problem." "Of course," Jade said, in the tone of someone agreeing to terms they have no intention of honoring. "His name is June. Marry on Friday at 7. And Ava, please, at least wear something clean." Ava hung up and looked at the collection notice. Then she looked at her closet. A thought arrived that was, honestly, a little too entertaining for someone who had just been voluntold into a blind date. She spent 20 minutes on Friday afternoon doing something she hadn't done in years, standing in her closet with genuine creative focus. Not the focus she brought to event logistics. That was organized and joyless. This was more like the energy of an artist who had just discovered a new medium. The medium was wrongness. A mustard yellow knit sweater that had been a mistake in the store 3 years ago, and a mistake every single time since. Wide-leg plaid trousers in a pattern so aggressive it seemed to be starting a fight with whatever it touched. Her grandmother's old Birkenstocks, brown leather, worn at the heel, the kind of footwear that said, "I am comfortable, and I have given up caring in what order." She pulled her hair into a shape at the top of her head that defied category. Not a bun, not a ponytail, something the clip was holding together through sheer structural optimism. No jewelry except for one small earring she found on the bathroom counter that she couldn't identify and was pretty sure wasn't even hers. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like a person who had gotten dressed in the dark during a power outage. She looked like a before photo in a magazine that didn't have an after. "Masterpiece," she said to her reflection. Her reflection appeared to agree. Maria was the kind of restaurant that made you feel underdressed if you arrived in anything less than quiet confidence and good shoes. The hostess guided Ava to a table near the window, without a single visible reaction to the outfit, which Ava genuinely respected as a feat of professional composure. He was already there. A man in a dark jacket, phone face down on the table, looking out at the street with a quality of stillness that Ava registered immediately as different. Not bored, not performing patience, just present. When she reached the table, he looked up. She watched his face the way a scientist watches an experiment. This was the moment, the micro-expression, the barely there flinch she had designed this entire look to produce. She'd been counting on it. He looked at her. He looked at the Birkenstocks. He looked at the sweater. He looked at the plaid trousers. He looked back at her face. And the corner of his mouth moved. Not a flinch. Not a polite smile. Something that arrived in his eyes before it reached his mouth. Something that looked, in a way that made absolutely no sense, like delight. "Ava Prescott," he said. "That's me," she said, and sat down, because sitting down was the only move she had left. "I'm June." He picked up his menu with the manner of a person who had made a decision about something. I was going to say you look nice, but that would be dishonest. And I don't like being dishonest." Ava opened her own menu. "Wow, already." "However," he continued, eyes still on the menu, "there is something extremely deliberate about this outfit, and I find that much more interesting than nice." She looked up at him. He was still reading the menu. He looked like someone who had said a perfectly ordinary thing and was now thinking about the branzino. "Are you always this direct?" she asked. He glanced up. "Are you always this loud about being uninterested while still showing up?" She stared at him. He looked back at the menu. Her ears felt warm. This, she thought, was going to be a problem. Dinner was extraordinary, and Ava resented it. She had come prepared to be bored. She had a whole internal playlist of symptoms she was planning to perform. The distant smile, the check the phone move, the I have an early morning that could be deployed at any moment like an emergency exit. She had none of these available to her, because June was the most unexpectedly engaging person she had sat across from in years, and the universe apparently had opinions about her plan. He talked like someone who had learned that words were expensive, and so he selected them carefully. He left space, and the space had a quality she found, against every intention, comfortable. He asked about her work. She told him, events, logistics, the invisible machinery behind the parties. And then, because she genuinely couldn't help it, she told him about the product launch 18 months ago where the keynote speaker canceled 4 hours before the event. The backup generator failed, and she had solved both problems through a combination of fast talking, one very persuasive phone call to a man in Pasadena who owed her a favor, and approximately 45 minutes of controlled panic she had not let anyone else see. He laughed. A real one, short and surprised, like it arrived before he decided whether to let it out. It changed his face entirely, made him look younger, easier, like the composed exterior had briefly misplaced itself. You improvised a keynote speaker in 4 hours, he said. I convinced a moderately well-known podcast host that appearing at a corporate event without notice was, quote, very anti-establishment of him. She ate a bite of her sea bass. He believed me. People believe things when you're calm and specific. That is either the best advice I've ever received, or the most terrifying. He watched her for a moment. You're wasted on corporate galas. You don't know what I'm wasted on, she said. You've known me for 45 minutes. 53, he said. But I take your point. She looked at him. He ate his pasta. She thought, this is exactly how it starts. She also thought, I know how this ends. She also thought, which was new and unwelcome, but I just told that story better than I've told it in a year, because he actually listened. When the check came, he reached for it. She reached for it simultaneously. Their hands landed on the small leather folder at the same moment. She started. I have it. It's a blind date. There's no obligation. There's also no competition, he said pleasantly. And she released the folder because the way he said it somehow made arguing feel like the strange choice. Outside in the warm November air, she waited for the awkward end of the evening she had designed to be awkward. I'd like to do this again, he said. She turned to look at him. You know this was a setup. Of course. And you know I dress like this on purpose. A pause. I suspected as much. Yes. And you're not. She gestured vaguely at the Birkenstocks. Bothered by that. He tilted his head. I've had dinners with people who dressed appropriately and had absolutely nothing to say. I'd rather have the Birkenstocks and the generator story. She tried to find the reasonable objection to that. She couldn't find one. Well, I'll think about it, she said finally. He nodded like that was a satisfactory answer, like he was a person comfortable with long games. Good night, Ava Prescott. She walked to her car. Halfway there, she realized she was smiling, which she found completely unacceptable. What Ava didn't know was what happened after she turned the corner. June stood on the sidewalk and made one call. She dressed to scare me off, he said, when Min answered. On purpose. It was a bet. On the other end, Min, his assistant for 6 years, a person of cultivated neutrality, made a sound that indicated processing without judgment. And she ordered the sea bass, ate the entire thing, told me a story about a generator that made me laugh out loud, and reached for the check. He paused. Find out what you can about Jade Washington. Min did not ask why. Min never asked why. I'll have something by morning. June put the phone away and looked up at the city sky, that particular deep blue-gray of LA nights where the stars lose to the light pollution. He had been in this city for 3 years. He had been careful for 3 years. He thought about a woman in Birkenstocks reaching for a check she'd already decided wasn't hers to pay, telling a story about a podcast host like it was the best thing that had happened to her in months. He texted Min. Find out where Ava Prescott has her next work event. Then he started walking. It had been a very long time since anything felt like a game worth playing. Min's report arrived at 7:14 the next morning. Jade Washington had lost a bet. Consequence. Set up Ava on a blind date by Friday. Ava had agreed and had explicitly said she was going to, Min quoted, make it die on arrival. June read this with his coffee and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. The specific pleasure of a situation with more layers than it appeared. She had played a game. He could leave it there. Chalk the evening up to an interesting story. Move on. That was the safe choice. And he had been making safe choices for 3 years. But she had reached for the check. She had eaten the whole sea base. She had told a generator story with the energy of someone who had been waiting months for someone to actually listen. He texted Min. Find out where Ava Prescott has her next work event. Some games were worth playing back. 6 days after Maria, Ava was managing a skincare brand launch on a Silver Lake rooftop and had exactly 0 mental space for surprises. She had a catering cart arriving at the wrong elevator, a display installation running 12 minutes behind, and a brand founder who kept rearranging the product display in ways that looked artistic to him and chaotic to everyone else. She was mid-redirect of the catering cart when she heard a voice she recognized. She turned around. June was standing near the entrance in conversation with Charles Vega, the brand's founder, which meant he was a legitimate invited guest, which somehow made it worse. He was in a dark jacket. He looked completely, offensively at ease. He caught her eye across the room. Something in his expression did a small thing she filed under. Suspicious. She finished redirecting the cart, briefed the floor manager, told herself she was not going to walk over there. She walked over there. "You're at a skincare launch," she said. "Ava." He turned from Charles with the mildly surprised expression of a man who was definitely not surprised. "What are you doing here?" She stared at him. "I work here. I planned this entire event. What are you doing here?" Charles is an old acquaintance. He gestured toward the founder, who had already drifted away to rearrange something. "And I try to support people I respect. By attending their skincare launches. By attending their events? Yes." He said it as though this were completely ordinary. "Do you attend a lot of events as part of your work?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "Are you following me?" A pause, just a beat too long. And that would require knowing your schedule. Would it? He held her gaze with the composure of a man who had decided, ahead of time, exactly how this conversation was going to go. She had the distinct sensation of having walked into a chess game mid-match. "Are you asking me to leave?" he said. "I'm asking you to move approximately 3 feet to the left," she said, "because the catering cart is coming back through in 4 minutes and you are standing directly in the path of the shrimp skewers." He stepped to the left without missing a beat. Better. Marginally. She turned and walked back to the event floor, where she had 11 actual problems to solve. She solved all 11 of them. She was very professional about it. She did not spend the next 2 hours tracking exactly where in the room he was. She absolutely did not do that. He didn't manufacture a goodbye. When the event wrapped, she caught a glimpse of him near the exit. He glanced at her once across the room, an expression she couldn't quite name, and then he was gone. She drove home on the 101 and thought about that glance, about the catering cart, about the way he'd stepped left immediately, without drama, without the small performance of inconvenience most people couldn't resist. She thought, he was absolutely there on purpose. She also thought, I have absolutely no proof of that. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't have saved. There's a farmer's market in Larchmont on Saturday morning. The tamale vendor is worth the drive. No agenda. Just tamales. She stared at it. That is a very strange way to ask someone to go somewhere with you, she typed. His reply was immediate. It's not strange. It's honest. I want to see you again. The tamales are incidental, but genuinely excellent. She set the phone down, picked it up, set it down again. The problem with honest was that it left her with very little to push against. Fine. 10 a.m. And you're buying the tamales. Obviously, he replied, and she could somehow, infuriatingly, hear the tone. The Larchmont Farmers Market on a December Saturday was the complete opposite of Maria. Loud and bright and joyfully chaotic, full of people with reusable tote bags and opinionated children and dogs who were very interested in the cheese vendor. Ava arrived in jeans and her oldest jacket with her hair loose. No effort, no performance. He could handle it or he couldn't. He was already there. Obviously, he was already there. Early, always early, holding 2 paper cups of coffee, looking in the direction she would come from. He didn't wave. He just waited. She took the coffee without preamble. Did you just assume I take it black? I assumed you'd tell me immediately and with no hesitation if you didn't. She drank it. Very good. I take it black. I know. She looked at him. How do you know? You seem like a person who decided what you liked a long time ago and never saw the point in adding steps. She thought about this. That's either a compliment or a criticism. An observation, he said, though I meant it as a compliment. They walked through the market in the warm December light. stopping when something caught their attention, moving on when it didn't. He bought persimmons from an elderly Vietnamese woman who looked him up and down and said, without preamble, "You're very handsome, you know." And he received this information with such complete, undefended grace that Ava laughed before she could stop herself. "You just took that," she said, when they'd moved on. "She's right," he said, with no particular ego about it, which made her laugh again. At the tamale stall, they stood in line for 12 minutes. Ava used those 12 minutes to learn, through direct questions and attention, the following. He had come to the U.S. at 22 for graduate school and stayed because American business culture was more tolerant of unconventional approaches. His younger sister in Seoul called twice a week and delivered opinions about his life without waiting to be asked. He did not enjoy parties in the abstract. "You were at a party last week," Ava pointed out. "I was at a product launch supporting a business acquaintance. The distinction matters." "Does it?" "Considerably." She ordered 2 tamales. He ordered 4. "4," she said. "I was also thinking about a second breakfast before I texted you," he said, as if this were perfectly normal. And then he handed her her tamales, and she found she had nothing to say back, which almost never happened. They sat on a bench. The market hummed. A small child walked past eating a strawberry the size of her face. "Why did you come to Maria?" Ava asked. "Really?" He looked at her. "You reached for the check." She frowned. "What?" "Most people on a date they don't want to be on perform the minimum and leave. You reached for the check." He looked at his tamale. "It was instinct. You weren't thinking about it. You just reached. That's who someone actually is, not the costume they put on." Ava sat in the December Los Angeles sun and felt something shift slightly in her chest. She ate her tamale. "I should tell you something," she said. He waited. "I'm not in a great place financially." She said it flatly, no cushioning. "My father died 2 years ago and left debt I didn't know about, and I've been managing it. It's getting smaller. But it's there, and I'd rather you know from the front than have it come out sideways later." He was quiet for a moment, the genuine kind of quiet. "I appreciate that," he said. "That's it? You appreciate it? What else would you like?" "Most people either minimize it or get strange about it." "Debt from a parent's estate isn't a character flaw," he said. "It's a circumstance. You're addressing it. Anyone who gets strange about that isn't paying attention to what the information actually says." He took a bite of his second tamale. "What it says is that you're reliable, you don't abandon things, and you know how to handle a problem quietly." Ava looked at him for a long moment. "That's a very specific reading." "I pay attention," he said simply. She looked away, at the market. The child was now also eating a strawberry almost as large as her face. Possibly a different child. It was hard to say. She thought, "I am absolutely in trouble." December in Los Angeles had its own texture. The city playing at winter while the temperature stayed in the 60s. Christmas lights on palm trees. Scarves worn as aesthetic rather than necessity. Ava moved through it the way she moved through everything, with her list, her schedule, her careful management of the gap between what she had and what she owed. She saw June 5 more times before the month was out. The first was coffee, which became 2 hours, and then 3. She learned that he'd been in LA for 3 years, that he'd built something here that was his rather than his family's, and that he had very strong opinions about bad espresso, which she found disproportionately entertaining. The second was the Silver Lake Reservoir on a Sunday afternoon. They walked the full loop and talked the entire time. And when they reached the end, Ava realized she'd been so absorbed in what they were talking about that she couldn't have said what any of it was. Not because it was forgettable, but because it had the quality of a conversation that simply was, without needing to perform being good. The third was the jazz bar in Los Feliz. He texted at 9:30 on a Thursday. At Cafe 322. Come if you want. No obligation. She went because she was done pretending she wouldn't. She found him at a small table in a dark room, and he made space for her without comment, like she'd simply been somewhere else for a few minutes and had come back. They didn't talk much. The music was too good. When she left at midnight, he walked her to her car without being asked and said goodnight without making anything of it. She drove home thinking about that particular quality of his attention, how it was always present and never demanding. The fourth time, he appeared at a corporate event she was managing. Legitimately invited, he clarified, before she could ask. She spent the event doing her job while intermittently aware of exactly where in the room he was. At one point, she was arranging a display and looked up to find him watching her with an expression she wasn't fast enough to catch before he looked away. When the event ended and she did her final walkthrough, she found a coffee on the check-in table near the exit with a napkin that said, "Good work, Black, J." She stood in the emptying venue holding a cup of coffee that was still hot and felt something in her chest do the thing it kept doing when she wasn't paying attention. The fifth time was a Korean restaurant in Koreatown. 3 tables, no menu. The owner brought things in an order that only made sense to the owner. June ate with the ease of someone who had grown up in rooms where food was a language, and he translated for her without being instructive about it. She ordered something she couldn't pronounce, and he coached her through it twice, and the second time, she got it right, and he looked at her with an expression she decided, for the moment, not to examine. She hadn't told Jade any of it. Jade would have opinions, a questionnaire, possibly a vision board. Ava wasn't ready. She wanted to keep this in the space where it lived, unexamined, undefined, present. She was good at knowing when she was in trouble. She had always been good at that. The problem was that knowing it had never previously made her any better at stopping. The debt notice came on a Thursday, 2 weeks before Christmas. Not a regular collection letter, those she opened without flinching. This was a legal notice from a firm she didn't recognize, about a credit facility she hadn't known her father held, secured against the deed to her grandmother's apartment. The apartment, the below-market apartment that was the only reason she could afford to live in Los Angeles. The apartment with her grandmother's curtains still in the bedroom closet. She read it 3 times. Then she picked up her phone and searched the name of the firm. 9 minutes later, she set the phone down. The parent company of the private equity firm was called Yoon Capital Group. Yoon Capital Group was the Los Angeles arm of a Seoul-based conglomerate called Yoon Corp. Yoon Corp was led by a man named Seo Jun Yoon, who had moved to Los Angeles 3 years ago, June. She sat at the kitchen table with her grandmother's curtains in the background, and a cold feeling spreading from her stomach outward, and thought about a man who had showed up at her events, who had texted her about tamales, who had sat across from her over tamales in the December sun, while she told him, carefully, honestly, because she believed in honesty, that she was carrying debt, and who had known exactly how much. All along, he had been holding the number. She stood up, put the notice in a drawer, and called her lawyer. Her lawyer, Patricia, flat fee, worth every dollar, found a procedural error in the original filing. Filing the challenge cost $400. Ava paid it and told Patricia she would handle the rest herself. Patricia also mentioned, clinically, that companies like Yoon Capital Group tended to resolve cases quickly when the debtor had a documented repayment history, and that if Ava had a personal connection there, this might be the moment to use it. It was said as information, as strategy. Ava heard this and said nothing. She did not call June. She did not answer his text that evening. "Haven't heard from you in a few days. Everything okay?" Because she didn't know how to answer it without confronting something she wasn't ready for or lying, and she wouldn't lie. What she did was nothing. And nothing, as it turned out, communicated with remarkable clarity. Min put the file on June's desk on a Tuesday morning. "She hired a lawyer," Min said. "Procedural challenge, county court. The challenge is legitimate. The original filing had a service error." June looked at the file without opening it. "And she knows who you are. Search pattern indicates she found the connection approximately 2.5 weeks ago." "She hasn't called." "No, she hasn't used the connection. She's pursuing the challenge through proper legal channels." Min paused. She paid the filing fee herself. June was quiet. Outside his office window, Los Angeles was doing what it always did, performing its ambitions in light and traffic, and the specific hum of a city that never fully stopped. He thought about a farmer's market in December. A woman who had reached for a check on a blind date she'd tried to sabotage. A woman who had told him, over tamales in the December sun, "I'd rather you knew from the front than have it come out sideways later." She'd been trying to avoid exactly this. He had known about the connection for 3 weeks. Min had flagged it when cross-referencing the real estate portfolio against his personal calendar. And he had been thinking about how to bring it up, how to make it not the only conversation they had. While he was thinking, she had found it herself. "She thinks I knew the whole time," he said. Min said nothing, because Min was not in the habit of confirming things that were already evident. He tried calling her. 3 times over 2 days. Silence, each time. Not the absence of an answer, but its own answer, complete and closed. On the 4th day, he drove to Silver Lake. Not to her apartment. That felt like the wrong kind of pressure. He drove to the reservoir, the one they'd walked around on that uncomplicated Sunday, and he sat on a bench with the January sun low over the water. He had spent 3 years being careful in ways that looked, from the outside, like distance. He had built walls that were structurally excellent, because 3 years ago a woman named Suyeon had spent 18 months being close to him for reasons that had nothing to do with him, and he had not known until the damage was done. He had been watching Ava for signs of the same thing since Maria. He had not found them. What he had found instead was a woman who paid $400 out of her own limited funds to file a legal challenge rather than use a connection that would have made everything easier. A woman who reached for checks on dates she didn't want to be on. A woman who coached her own pronunciation of Korean food and laughed when she got it right. He sat at the reservoir and thought, "I was so careful about being hurt again that I forgot to notice I was the one causing the damage this time." Jade Washington knew Ava Prescott the way you only know someone after 12 years, which meant she knew the exact quality of her silence and what it cost. The silence of the past 3 weeks had a texture Jade recognized. She waited, because pushing Ava before she was ready was like pushing a cat. You could try, but you'd end up bleeding and the cat would be somewhere else. She waited until Ava showed up at her apartment on a Friday evening with a bottle of wine and no explanation. Jade poured 2 glasses and sat on the living room floor, where they'd always done the real conversations, going back to a dorm room in Atlanta when they were 22. And she waited some more. Ava told her everything. The blind date she'd tried to ruin, the man who hadn't flinched at the Birkenstocks, the farmer's market, the jazz bar, the Korean restaurant, the legal notice, the 9 minutes of searching, the name. Jade listened without interrupting. When Ava finished, she refilled both glasses. "Let me ask you something," Jade said. "In those 5 weeks, before the notice, were you happy?" Ava was quiet. Not okay, not managing, happy. A pause. Yeah, Ava said, in the way she said things she didn't want to mean. Jade nodded. Okay. She turned the wine glass in her hands. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not immediately deflect with a joke." Ava said nothing, which was agreement. "I called him," Jade said. "After the first date, you know I do a check-in, and he told me, Ava, he said he'd found out about the bet, that you'd dressed that way on purpose." She paused. "He said he didn't care. He said the person he'd sat across from at dinner was real, and that was enough." Ava looked at her. "He knew from date 1, Jade said. He knew you were trying to blow the whole thing up and he showed up anyway. Every time. The event, the farmer's market, the jazz bar, the restaurant. Every single time." She met Ava's eyes. "Does that sound like a man who found out about your debt and thought, great, now I have leverage?" Ava said nothing. "The debt thing is terrible timing and bad luck," Jade said. "It's not the thing you're actually scared of." "Then what am I scared of?" Jade looked at her best friend. This woman who had been holding things together with both hands since she was 25. Who was so good at managing the distance between herself and disaster that she'd started to mistake the distance for safety. "That he's real," Jade said. "And that it could actually work. And that's the one situation you never made a plan for." Ava sat on the living room floor for a long time. "He should have told me, she said finally. Yes, Jade said. He should have. That's not nothing. No, it isn't. They sat with that for a moment, as friends sometimes have to do, not fixing, just sitting. But you should hear him out, Jade said. Ava looked at the ceiling. When did you become reasonable? I have always been reasonable, Jade said, with enormous dignity. You have always been stubborn. That's fair, Ava said. Jade refilled her glass. So, what are you going to do? Ava looked at the wine. She thought about a man at a farmer's market who already had her coffee ready, a man who stepped left without being asked twice, a man who said I pay attention and meant it as an entire philosophy. I don't know yet, she said, which, for Ava Prescott, was basically the same as yes. He didn't go to her apartment. He didn't send more texts. He understood that there are situations where capability is completely irrelevant to whether doing something is right. This was one of them. What he did was call his legal division and separate the Prescott case entirely from his personal communication stream. Then he called the portfolio director and told her to review the procedural challenge on its merits, independent of anything else. It had merits. It was processed favorably. He didn't tell Ava he'd done this. It wasn't a gesture meant to be seen. It was a correction, the kind you make when you recognize a harm. Not to earn credit, but because the harm was real and needed addressing regardless of what came after. He went home. He ate dinner alone. He sat on the balcony in the Los Feliz Hills, looking at the city that was always performing, and he thought about what it cost to stop performing. His sister called at 8:30 his time, 1:30 in Seoul. You sound strange, June said, 5 minutes in. I'm fine. You sound like when you've decided that acknowledging something is unnecessary. He said nothing, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. Is it the woman you mentioned? She had the specific Korean sister ability to extract confession from silence. It's complicated, he said. June. The diminutive landed with the weight of 31 years. Complicated is not the same as impossible. You know the difference. You're choosing to act like you don't. He looked at the city. Not quite dark. Never quite dark. Just the permanent amber haze where the stars should be. I don't know if she'll hear me, he said. That's not the same as whether you should say it, June said. You're letting one question eat the other. Say what's true. What happens after that isn't yours to control. He sat on the balcony for a while after the call ended. Then he went inside and ordered pastries from a bakery on Sunset she'd mentioned once, in passing, as one of her favorite places in the city. He set his alarm for early. She opened the door. It was a Saturday morning in mid-January, clear, cold for LA, the kind of light that made everything look a little more definite than usual. He was on her doorstep holding a paper bag from the bakery and wearing an expression that had, for once, no architecture around it, just a face. I'm not here to explain the debt, he said. I want you to know that first. She held the door half open. Said nothing. The portfolio was acquired 8 months before I met you, he said. I didn't know the connection until Min flagged it in December. 3 weeks in. I should have told you immediately. I was thinking about how to bring it up without it becoming the whole conversation, and while I was thinking, you found it yourself. He paused. I understand exactly how that looks. I'm not asking you to overlook it. I asked my team to process the procedural challenge on its merits. It's done. Separate from this, separate from whatever you decide right now. She looked at him. I also need to tell you something that has nothing to do with any of it, he said. I came back after Maria because you reached for the check and then ate your entire sea bass and told me a story about a generator like it was the best thing that had happened to you in months. I showed up at the skincare launch because I wanted to see if the market version of you was the same as the dinner version. It was a pause. I have been careful for a long time in ways that look a lot like absence, and that caution, mine, not yours, became something that hurt you. I'm sorry. The January morning came through the trees on her street and made patterns on the sidewalk. She could smell the bakery bag, butter and sugar and something warm. She thought about Jade on a living room floor saying, "That's the one situation you never made a plan for." She thought about a farmer's market and a man who already had her coffee ready. "You knew about the bet," she said, "from the beginning." "Yes." "And you came back anyway." "Yes." "Every time." He held her gaze. "Every time." She opened the door wider. She didn't let him off easy. That wasn't who she was, and he clearly didn't want her to be. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd read the legal notice, where she'd sat alone for 2 years managing the gap, and they had the whole conversation, the real version. She told him exactly what it felt like to find his name on a legal document after 5 weeks of him paying careful attention to every version of her. She did not soften it. He listened the way he always did, completely, without defending against it, taking it in as something he was responsible for. "I thought you saw a woman with debt," she said, "and decided that was information worth having. I know. And I need you to understand that thought didn't come from nowhere." She looked at her hands around the coffee cup. "I've been the person handling things alone for 2 years. And I'm good at it. But I'm also tired of being the person who assumes everyone is eventually going to find the weak point." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know what that's like. Not the debt, I'm not comparing, but the weak point." He met her eyes. "Someone I trusted spent 18 months being close to me for reasons that had nothing to do with me. When it ended, I told myself I'd processed it. I hadn't. I'd just gotten very good at watching for signs of the same thing." He paused. "I watched for them in you, for 3 months, and they weren't there. And you're only telling me this now. Yes. That's also something." "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at him across the kitchen table. Outside, Los Angeles was doing a Saturday morning. The food truck, a neighbor's dog, someone's music from 2 floors up. Ordinary, continuing. "I don't have a weak point to exploit," she said. I'm just a person with debt and a plan and a friend who loses sports bets." Something in his face changed. Not quite a smile. Something quieter. "I know," he said. "I've been waiting for the calculation for 3 months and it isn't there. He paused. "Just you, reaching for checks, eating tamales, telling generator stories." She laughed, a short, surprised sound that arrived before she decided whether to let it. It broke something in the room that had needed breaking. They ate the pastries from the bag. They talked for 3 more hours. By the time he left, the light had shifted into the low gold of a January afternoon, and she stood in her doorway looking at him on the sidewalk and thought, "I have no plan for this. I am going to have to learn to be okay with that." "Tomorrow?" he said. "Tomorrow," she said. He walked down the street. She closed the door and leaned against it. Jade's voice in her memory. "You never made a plan for this." Which was true. Which was, she thought, possibly exactly the point. The debt took 14 more months to clear. Ava did it herself. She always would have. June offered once, carefully, with the specific phrasing of someone who understood the weight of the offer and was making it anyway. She looked at him and said no. He nodded and never raised it again, because he understood the difference between help and erasure, and that was exactly the kind of understanding that made her trust him more, which she suspected he also knew, which was almost annoying. He did other things instead. He showed up when she needed a second person in a room. He learned her work schedule and was available without needing to be managed. He ate genuinely questionable catering at 3 of her events without complaint, which she considered a significant act of character. He stood out of the way of the carts. Once, at a particularly chaotic corporate gala going sideways in 4 directions simultaneously, she looked up from her crisis to find him standing at the edge of the room watching her with the quiet, specific look of someone witnessing something they find genuinely impressive. She pointed at him, mouthed "don't," and went back to fixing the crisis. When she looked up again, he was talking to a guest and not watching her at all, which meant he'd looked away when she asked him to. which was also the kind of thing she kept noticing. She learned the shape of him, the way he went still when processing something difficult. Not cold, just concentrated. The particular quality of his attention when she was talking about something that mattered. The way he handled the people around him with a precision of respect that amounted to warmth without performing it. She met June in the spring, a video call, 3 time zones, Seoul at 9 in the morning, LA at 4 in the afternoon. June spent 40 minutes alternating between asking Ava questions that were sharp in the way of someone who loved her brother and knew exactly what he needed, and telling June things about himself that he clearly found accurate and inconvenient in equal measure. At one point June said, directly to Ava, "He doesn't laugh easily, but he laughs at your stories. He told me about the generator." Ava looked at June. June looked at the ceiling. "I mentioned it," he said. "Once." 4 times, June said. Ava liked June enormously. She finally told Jade everything. Jade made her repeat the Birkenstock part 3 times with increasing gleeful disbelief, then made her say, out loud, in actual words, the thing she'd been carefully managing around for months. "Say it," Jade said. "I'm happy," Ava said. Again. "I'm not saying it again. One more time, for the people in the back. Jade, I will leave." "You're happy," Jade announced to her apartment, her building, possibly the street below. "Please," Ava said. But she was laughing, and Jade was laughing, and outside the window the Los Angeles spring was in full performance, that particular quality of California April light that fills up every corner, that makes the city look like it was just invented, like everything is still possible. The final notice was dated a Saturday morning in early March. Ava opened it at the kitchen table, same chair, same morning light through her grandmother's curtains, and read the confirmation of final payment. She sat with it in her hands for a moment, feeling the specific weight of something she'd carried so long she'd started to mistake it for her own bones. She photographed it and sent it to Patricia, who replied, "Well done." 2 words, exactly right. She put the notice down and walked to the window. The street below was doing what streets do on Saturday mornings, unhurried, ordinary, completely indifferent to the fact that something significant had just finished. The food truck, a woman jogging, 2 kids on scooters with the confidence of people who have never once considered that sidewalks might be for other purposes. June had texted 20 minutes ago. Found parking. Market opens at 9. She put on her jacket, the old one, the comfortable one. Did her hair without drama. Left the apartment exactly as she was. No performance, no plan, no armor. The Larchmont morning was bright and warm. Market stalls already set up. The tamale vendor in his usual spot. Spring in Los Angeles. The city at its most optimistic. Light everywhere. The particular blue of the sky that showed up in April and made you forget every complicated thing about living in a city that was always asking more of you than it gave back. She turned the corner. He was there. Of course he was there. Early, always early. Holding 2 paper cups of coffee and looking in the direction she would come from. When she came around the corner, he saw her and his face did the thing. The smile that started in his eyes before it reached his mouth. The quiet, real version. The one that wasn't for the room. She crossed the street. She took the coffee. It was black, obviously. "Final payment went through this morning," she said. He looked at her. "Ava." "I know," she said. "I just thought you should know." He was quiet for a moment. Then, the small tilt of his head that meant more than it showed. "How does it feel?" She thought about it. The kitchen table, the curtains, 2 years of jaw set, shoulder squared, by herself managing. The particular exhaustion of being the only person holding something, and the particular relief of setting it down. "Like I forgot what it felt like to not be carrying it," she said. "And now I remember." He looked at her for a long moment. "Good," he said. It was such a simple word. It was exactly the right word. She took a sip of her coffee. Around them, the Larchmont market was alive with its Saturday morning self. People and dogs and children with opinions, and the tamale vendor who had become, without announcement, a landmark in a story that had started with a mustard yellow sweater and a plan that failed in the best possible way. "Tamales?" he said. Obviously, she said. They walked into the market together. The Los Angeles spring held them in its particular, impossible light, the kind that makes everything look like it was always going to turn out this way, even when it wasn't, even when the plan was wrong from the start, especially then.